John David Graham is all about helping others, giving people a second chance at life, including those who've been released from prison and need a safe place to live. Graham's gone from homelessness to business owner to published author, but it took a while. He says he finally hit his stride at 53 when he started Good Samaritan Home, a nonprofit agency helping people restart their lives after prison. Then at age 61, Graham finished his doctorate in applied theology and at 75 published his debut novel, Running as Fast as I Can. It's the fictionalized story of one man's journey to overcome an abusive background to find forgiveness and love. So, hey, John, thanks for joining us today on the Lean to the Left podcast.
I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
Hey, man, tell us what inspired you to start Good Samaritan Home. That's really, really interesting to me.
Well, I'd like to say it was some sort of a vision, some apocryphal vision, but the truth was that I had made so many left and right turns trying to find where I fit, including a stint where I was homeless. Uh, the funny story is that I was living in my truck when I was single. They repossessed my truck, and I met this wonderful girl who was working and had a house, and I was on the street, and the truth was she ended up marrying me. So she saw something. She saw something that the finance company didn't see.
That's one way to get a house.
Yeah,
Marry
but here's the
somebody.
funny part. I've been paying her back ever since. I guarantee you.
So,
We've been
wait
together
a minute.
48 years this month. So
Holy mackerel. So you were living in a truck and was she the repo lady or what?
close. I went to church to get a free meal.
Oh, okay.
And she said, "Oh, hi, how are you? And would you like to come for dinner?" So I did. I went to dinner the one night, and then I came back the next night and the next night. And I said, "I don't think I need to go to California that much." I was going to take off and go to California.
Uh-huh.
And of course, then the repo kind of changed those plans too. But I said, "I think you're worth staying around." And this
Okay.
was in Detroit. So, it took an awfully attractive woman to keep me in Detroit. And yeah, it was back after the Detroit riots, the race riots. So the
Uh-huh.
city was tough. And so what I ended up doing is getting a job as a truck driver in Detroit, going around through all the city, delivering uniforms. And
Okay.
it was an education, to say the least. But I wanted to do more. I'd always wanted to write a book, but
Uh-huh.
I had nothing to write about at that time.
Mhm.
So I had to provide for my wife and my soon family.
Okay.
And I went from job to job trying to find what I felt I was comfortable with.
Right.
And I ended up as a building contractor. I was a journalist for a while. I even did a stint as a minister, thinking that I could help people that way.
Hmm.
Well, what I found was that the church can be just like anywhere else. It can be very political.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had a building contractor's philosophy in the church. If something doesn't fit, you just get a bigger hammer. And and needless to say, I didn't do well as a minister. Uh, so what happened was
Oh
I
man.
was 53 years old, been through about 8 careers, and we had really nothing. And I've got 3 children in tow. And so what we decided to do was, what is our passion? That's what my wife asked me. What do you
Hmm.
really want to do? And the answer was, I think I can help people who have gone through the same thing as I have, or maybe
Okay.
worse.
Right.
So we found the oldest home in town that we could afford and started remodeling that as a homeless shelter. And that's how we started Good Samaritan Home.
Okay.
The
And
idea
what
was to help people who had been through what we had been through.
okay. So what does it do? What does Good Samaritan Home do exactly?
Well, initially it was just a homeless shelter. We were actually using our own house and sharing a bedroom, but with my construction skills, we were able to find a house across the street and remodel it because my wife had a little inheritance that we were able to garner into a down payment.
Okay.
So I spent 2 years crawling through this building trying to remodel it, and
Okay.
we used it as a homeless shelter for off the street homeless people.
Okay.
But that
Okay.
meant that there's no income. We were trying to just garner grants and such.
Sure.
But literally, in the beginning, there was no income for 5 years. So it was definitely tough.
Oh man.
But what happened was the Department of Correction, I had in the back of my mind, I'd always wanted to help people coming from prison.
Why?
Uh, it, uh, I don't know. I suppose it's this philosophy of I've been an outcast, and the homeless people I was dealing with often had been in jail or in
Right.
prison.
Right.
And the majority of cases, there was mental health issues.
Right.
So what happened was the Department of Correction in Ohio actually is very progressive, and they had developed a plan in 2001 for reentry. And the
Okay.
idea is that if you put people in the community, they are much more likely to be rehabilitated than they are in prison.
Okay.
Now, that means that you can do a prison term, but it's not supposed to be forever term. And when you release somebody, they need to have something to transition that is not a halfway house and not a prison house.
Okay.
And so they call it independent housing. And they asked
Okay.
me if I'd be willing to use one of my shelters as an independent housing program. And they
Okay.
would pay us a per diem. And
Okay.
that's how Good Samaritan really started the reentry work.
Oh wow, that's interesting. That really is. So, how is it now that people are selected? There must be a waiting list. I mean,
Well, the beautiful thing with this is a homeless shelter itself, where you take people off the street, can be more dangerous because you
right.
have no filtering and no control. You're
Mm.
just straight shelter. But by offering a reentry house, you have the parole officer involved, and they do the filtering, and they'll send us a note saying John is getting released on January 5th, and he has this history, and he's a low risk offender and he's coming out homeless. Can you help him? And so we would take him into our house for 90 days or 180 days, whatever was needed. And we would have the parole officer who could coordinate with us. So if we had any issues, we could always call him in. But most people were just so relieved to have a safe place to live
Hmm.
that the truth was we didn't have any problems to speak of
Okay.
because it wasn't a sentence. And if somebody said, I found my own house, they could leave. And that was really a success story.
How many prisoners um at a time do you have that you're taking care of in this place?
Well, I was once told that there's always work in rehabilitation. And
Uh-huh.
so what happened was the numbers were so great, we kept adding houses. And
Oh,
eventually we expanded into Dayton, Ohio, which is a much larger city than where I lived in a rural community.
uh-huh.
And so now we have 19 houses and 10 staff. On any given day, we can have 80 to 100 men and women in our houses.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, think
Absolutely
of it like a
incredible.
boarding house arrangement.
Yeah, that really is. And do they is there a fixed term that they can stay there or what?
Generally, it's 90 days, but everybody stays longer if needed. Uh,
Okay.
as long as what they do is they say, I'm looking for a job. Here's what I've done. Can I have an extra 30 days?
Okay.
And because we're partnered with the state of Ohio, they would we would send the request in and they would approve it and they would in turn pay us a per diem for that stay because
Okay.
it costs $109 a day to house somebody in prison. They pay us a fraction of that. So we're able to make our bills and pay our staff, and the taxpayers can save literally millions of dollars. But the best part is that if a guy is in the community instead of jail, he's working, he's
Mhm.
paying taxes, he's paying child support, and
Mhm.
basically he's moving on with his life the way you want him to do. So it's a win-win situation.
That's amazing. That's just amazing. I just find this astounding that you're doing this. Um, so how many altogether have you helped so far, do you think?
Just under 2,500 men and women.
Holy mackerel. And that's in how long? What period of time?
We started the shelter in 2001, but we actually
Okay.
started this program in 2007. So
Okay.
that's 17 years.
Wow. Wow. Do you have plans for further growth?
We're always looking to grow.
Uh-huh.
I tried to buy another. I was looking at a six plus apartment just last month, and we were fortunate to get a lot of our properties when the housing market was in a downturn. So we could buy a duplex or a fourplex for $50,000 or $30,000.
Wow.
Now it's a little harder because the market is much more expensive.
Uh-huh.
So, but we've always looked because if we don't grow, we have to turn somebody down, and if we turn them down, they're on the street. So, I think that's what makes us good is we're always willing to flex and change and grow if needed.
What kind of staff do you have that helps you with this?
I would say everybody has come from some place where they've had a failure or a setback or even incarceration. Several people have been graduates of our program. And I like to say that every one of us has a limp
Hmm.
because none of us can keep up with normal people. That's why we're here.
Okay. That's
It makes
interesting.
us more sympathetic, I think.
Do you face any community resistance when you start when you open
We
up these
did
places?
the original town was a suburban, white, rural community, working
Yeah.
class. And
Uh-huh.
when I first started, the first man came from prison. The newspaper found out about it and wanted to do a story. So I thought that would be a positive thing,
Sure.
get people involved.
Hmm.
And it immediately blew back on us. Uh,
Yeah.
there were petitions to the city council, there were ordinances passed, there were threats.
Uh-huh.
I had police protection at one point.
Oh,
It was people were writing letters to the editor. They said that one lady even said that she had to sell her house because she's afraid to have more babies in our neighborhood for
oh my
fear of
goodness.
our residents.
Wow.
So it was
So
all
it's
emotional. It actually
yeah.
it's very much like we're going through with the immigrant issue today.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
everybody's a murderer, everybody's a rapist because they don't look like me.
Right. Understood.
It,
So
it
it's
was
the
it was never said, but the real issue was always racial.
aha. So most of these people that you help are African American or people of color or what? Or not?
Well, that's the perception. If you watch the news, it
Uh-huh.
seems like all the news shows these people being arrested in the city, and it's always it would be somebody who's black or
Yeah,
some
yeah,
minority,
yeah, yeah.
and but the numbers themselves in prison show that the majority are white.
Hmm.
But to a white rural community, you only see with your emotions.
Yeah.
And our first resident was black, but it had nothing to do with the numbers. It was simply he was the one who happened to have a need. And
Okay.
here's the irony, Bob. He was more afraid of coming to a white town than the town was to have a black man.
That's just amazing.
The
That
fear was on both sides.
that's just
But
amazing.
what happened was eventually what we did was I tried to present data and say, look at the statistics, just like we're talking about.
Hmm.
But nobody heard that. So what we did was we took a snowblower every time it snowed in the winter and cleaned everybody's sidewalk.
Okay.
And what that showed people was that we were a good neighbor. And
Okay.
and that because our house was clean and quiet, and because we were keeping the neighborhood, we had become a watchman for the neighborhood.
Okay.
And so if anything was going on, I would call the PD and say, can you come look at this?
Okay.
And our neighborhood literally began to clean up. People started to remodel their own houses. And eventually, the streets got much quieter. So I think what happened was people felt they couldn't articulate, but they felt that the neighborhood was somehow safer. And
Wow.
the criticisms of it took several lawsuits too,
Oh,
but
wow.
because there was what they called tortious interference, where they would pass a law that couldn't be defended in court. And eventually, what the city did was they just deleted the ordinance.
Okay.
But it took about 6 years total litigation. But
Incredible.
the best part is that when we actually started working in Dayton, where there's a much higher crime rate, we haven't had any issues. In fact, the city has been very welcoming
Right.
because our houses are in a neighborhood that's in decline. We fix our house up. We become the watchman for that neighborhood. And the truth is that we become an improvement. And so we haven't had any politicking in Dayton.
Amazing. John, whose idea was it to turn this thing into a watchman for the neighborhood? Was that your idea?
Well, I suppose it's just part of my personality because let's say for example, I'm driving down and I see somebody by the side of the road.
Yeah.
I always had a habit of stopping.
Okay.
And there was an accident once on the interstate in the middle of winter, and I saw it happen, and I stopped my car in the middle of the road and went out and flagged traffic.
Right.
So that, and I have a tendency to be a watchdog, and so in the neighborhood, rather than say you guys have to take care of this, I've always felt like the only way to change a neighborhood is we have to do it ourselves. And so it just so happens that they were afraid of my residents when my residents weren't causing the problem. It was
Hmm.
mostly the other neighbors.
Hmm.
There were drug deals and such going on,
Sure.
and now in Dayton, of course, it's a whole different ballgame because the crime level is much more intense than it is in a rural community.
Now, have you had incidents where some of your residents have caused problems and you had to get rid of them, or how do you deal with that?
It's rare, but I
Oh,
had
yeah.
one guy. I had one. I forgot about him, but he was working for a realtor down the street of all places, and for some reason he needed a can of gasoline. So he shinnied under this guy's motorhome and punched his gas tank to take a siphon a gallon of gasoline. And
You
and
kidding
I
me?
found out about it, and I said, "You stupid son of a bitch! You shit in my yard!" And I bought a bus ticket and sent him back to Tennessee the next morning. And it's if I see your ass around here again, I will personally arrest you. But that's
Oh.
rare. That's rare.
Now, all right, on the other side of it, tell me, what about success stories?
The first resident we had was the black man, came from Cleveland. He was the one who was afraid himself.
Right, right.
He eventually, not only did he not go back to prison, he got a job, got married, took over her kids as well. And it's been 20, give or take 20 years since he's been with us. And he called me just 2 weeks ago. And he said, I'm driving truck. I'm living down near Cincinnati. I've been doing this for years. I'm still married. And I just read your book. And I just wanted to say I enjoyed it.
Oh,
So, and that to me, the first resident who would call and say, I'm still thinking about you.
isn't that nice? That
Yeah, it
really
it
is.
it
Yeah,
felt good because
yeah.
it was an education for all of us because when
Uh-huh.
he came, he actually lived in our house. So we had a man from the city, different color, different culture, living with us. So we had to learn what his culture was like, and he had to learn what our culture was like.
Right,
And we're
right.
still in touch.
That's cool. All right. So tell me about running as fast as you can. It's been called everyone's story. Why is that?
Well, when I was going to the city council to try to impress people with the statistics, nobody listened.
Yeah.
And so I like to compare it to like a lifeboat safety. if you're going on a tour, a boat tour, a cruise, and they give you a lecture on lifeboat safety, you'll never listen to it.
Right.
But if they show you Jack and Rose on the Titanic, all you're going to think is, where are the lifeboats? Because if Jack and Rose had a lifeboat, it would have changed their lives.
Uh-huh.
So I said, I can't present statistics. I have to present a story about second chances. And I needed multiple second chances, and my staff in many ways needed it, and clearly my residents do. So
Sure.
I'm going to write a story, a fictionalized story, but in some ways it followed my life story, like Forrest Gump, going through the 60s, going through all that turmoil. And some of us, because uh, we start so far behind in the race because of birth or circumstance, we don't know where the lifeboats are. We don't know where to even look for them.
Hmm.
So, what I'm trying to show is that if Daniel Robinson, the main character, if eventually he can make it, then you can make it too. And that's what people are finding, is that they identify with Daniel as a real person. They'll identify with his struggles and with his success.
Hmm.
And without giving a spoiler here, there is no happy ending as such. It's like real life. Happy
Hmm.
endings are always mixed because
Hmm. Hmm.
life is a matter of grief and joy.
Yeah, that's the truth. Okay, so you started your own publishing company. It's called Don Quixote Press.
Right.
Why? Why'd you do that?
Well, after 200 rejections from all the agents, I felt like I was tilting at windmills.
200? Really?
About 200, yeah.
Man, you didn't quit, did you? I mean, you just kept going.
I rewrote the book 24 times until I
No,
felt like it was the best effort I could.
really.
And I had a professional editor finally come in, and we worked for 2 years on it because
Wow.
my training as a journalist had taught me to tell the story in black and white.
Right,
But what he taught me was to bring emotion into it.
right, right,
And
right, right.
and what I'm finding is that many people are getting very emotional when they read this story because they're identifying with uh, it has sexual abuse in it of children. It has the Haight-Ashbury issues, the racial riots, all those things in the 60s Daniel went through. And
Hmm.
a lot of my readers can identify with that. But what I
Hmm.
found in New York was with these young 24-year-old agents, one literally said to me, that Kent State story couldn't be true. That couldn't have happened in America. And I said, sweetheart, I was there. Trust me, it happened. But
Jeez.
I I found that people like you and I can look at it and say, I remember 1968. I
Right.
remember what it was like when Bobby Kennedy was killed.
Yeah.
And it gives us perspective, and I think that's why Forrest Gump has done so well as a movie because we can identify with with Forrest, who literally had a limp, but he
Right.
learned to overcome it, and
Right.
even though he was limited, he became a very wise person because of his struggles,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that's Daniel Robinson.
Okay. So, what is the best advice that you can give someone who wants to start over late in their career and do something different, something new?
The best example I can give you is that I was down in San Antonio where I do my writing, and there was an ad in the paper that said the Harrison Ford had television serial called 1923, and they were looking for walk-on actors. And so I've never done acting, I don't care for it, but I thought it would be fun. So at 76, I put my name into the production company to be an actor, and they hired me. And so I went up to Austin, got all fitted out for my part and got all prepared. And I did everything required of me. And of course, they cut my part, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that you
Okay.
try something new.
Right.
And even if it fails, you haven't failed. You did your best.
Right.
So, so that's my advice. You're never too old to try something new. And don't think of it like a sprint where you should have to run quickly and you reach your goal.
Right.
Life is a marathon, and you have to run not fast, but you keep running long.
Yeah, that's
And
for
so
sure.
that's why you and I can look back and say, all those things I did are not just memories, they're preparation for where I am today. This is where I need to be.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Now you brought up the 60s, living through the political and social upheaval of the 60s. I did that too. I mean, obviously from you just look at me, you can tell. Um, I covered the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968.
Oh, then you
And
know exactly what it was
oh
like.
yeah, I mean it was one of the highlights of my life, let alone career. It really was. And I learned so much about journalism from working that convention. And it was just an incredible experience. And then you mentioned um, Bobby Kennedy being killed. And I was covering I was working in New Jersey as the UPI bureau chief in Trenton and covering election night that night. Incredible, incredible experience. And the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, I was working for a daily newspaper, um, and took copies of the paper announcing the assassination out on the street and passed them out. And that's how a lot of people found out about it because no internet in those days. And if they weren't listening to the radio or watching TV, they didn't know what happened.
That's right.
And it was just so all those things, they form they form your life and you build on that, right?
It's I just read a piece in Barron's newsletter that they're saying that what matters more than anything else to the American people is the economy. And I think, unfortunately, that's true, as long as my bank account is solvent. But
Hmm.
you and I have been through things where it seemed the world was literally coming apart.
Really,
And
absolutely.
our parents lived through this whole concept where the world did come apart with the
Yeah,
Depression and World War II,
right.
and they learned to focus in on things that really mattered.
Yeah.
And I think in the 60s we became I think so many of us became so jaded that we dropped out of politics.
Hmm.
And it took me 30 years to vote because of
Really,
that.
no
And
kidding.
so what happened was that I'm seeing things now that remind me a great deal of 1968, and I'm able to understand that life is cyclical. We will get through this. Whether
What are the things that you're seeing that remind you of 1968?
Well, the violence for one, the campus
Hmm.
bombings were common back in the 60s. The
Yeah,
campus protests. Now, they could be Gaza today, but it was the Vietnam War back for
correct,
us.
correct.
And it was not uncommon to have campus protests, not just at Columbia, but the most of the small colleges too had some sort of
Sure.
protest.
Yeah.
And there was the capstone probably was Watergate, where we felt like our criticism was justified
Hmm.
because the government itself was internally hemorrhaging. And maybe that's why Jimmy Carter was so, in some respects, was so refreshing
Yeah.
because he came across naive, perhaps, but he came across as honest. And I really think that we needed that.
Well, I mean, if you take a look at the contrast today, it was a day after Jimmy Carter's death that a court ruled that Trump had to ruled against Trump when he tried to get rid of
Oh,
the
the judgment about Gene Carroll.
yeah, correct, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and to me, that was just very ironic that that happened the day after Jimmy Carter, the man who was known for telling the truth, for being as honest as he could, um, famously said, "I will never lie to the American people." And Donald Trump, no, known for thousands of lies. So that brings me to this question. What are your thoughts as we embark on another term of a Trump presidency?
I would say I'm much more nervous than I was in the 60s because um, say we may not have agreed with Lyndon Johnson or Richard Nixon
Right.
or even Jimmy Carter,
Hmm.
but we at least felt that they were capable. We felt like they did in their own way had the best interest of the nation, even though we disagreed vehemently with them.
Right.
But today, it's a whole different situation. I think democracy itself is in question. And the things that the flagrant selling of the White House, where I mean, literally capitalizing on the office
Oh,
in
it just
ways that we couldn't even fathom, is beyond my comprehension. And I'm mostly concerned with the politicians and the voters who enable that. Uh, do we really deserve, do we want a democracy? That's what it's asking me. I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer.
John, I think you just nailed it. You really did. It's an incredible thing to think of what might lie ahead for this country over these next 4 years. I mean, just the idea of the President of the United States charging people $100,000 to come to church with them.
Absolutely. It's beyond comprehension. If you ask Harry Truman how much he made as a post president, he wouldn't know what you're asking.
Right, right. So it's just an incredible thing that we're facing, and now I'm seeing on social media uh, quote after quote after quote of people who voted for Trump already regretting that vote. And that's just, to me, I think it's just going to increase when people find out the repercussions from his uh, plans for charging tariffs, uh, kicking out uh, immigrant workers that are needed in this country. Um, Things could go really bad real fast. And what would that mean in terms of possibly violence going forward?
The very fact that there are apparently two assassination attempts on Mr. Trump, that surprised me. I thought it would be the other way around, where there would be from the radical right wing would be more violent,
Yeah.
but the possibility of violence from the left would could easily escalate into uh, I call a 19 or an 1858 type of situation where brother against brother.
Absolutely. I don't know, I've done probably three or four different podcast interviews with people who are really worried about the potential of another civil war in this country. Um, and I think the original fear of that would have been if Trump had lost, and fear that the right wing would rise up and cause this kind of violence. But I'm now thinking that it could be the other way around if this continues. And that's really a scary thing.
And that there could be an instigator. It could be a lone wolf,
Yeah,
but it would become bigger than reality.
yeah,
And
yeah.
there are, I think, Charlottesville is a good example. If you put a stick into that type of mentality, and when people literally walking around with AKs on their legally walking around town with AKs,
Right.
and, and they're looking for ways to be violent, and it's it just reminds me of the Old West when before the laws were actually in place, where
Right.
if you didn't carry a gun, you would be dead. And
Yeah.
I thought we had evolved beyond that, but
Yeah.
I have several guns that I never use, never carry,
Uh-huh.
because I only have them because it was just the idea of having something in my bedroom just in case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, I'm not sure if I know how to shoot it or not. So
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you're saying about that. All right, Don. I don't want to close this thing up on a downer, which I think we're at right now. So give me something uplifting for our audience to take away from your experience, from your book, from what you're doing, because you're doing some really good things, John. You are.
listening to our conversation here, I was just thinking of this very thing. It reminds me of what Dr. King said, that he believed in a moral universe, and
Yeah.
he believed that the arc does bend slowly, but it does bend toward justice. And so, what I've determined to do is what we are doing today, helping one man or one woman get their life back on track.
Hmm.
If I can do that, then maybe I can help the big picture by doing my little part, because I do believe that there is a moral universe. And I believe that we're responsible to be part of that moral universe. And it's not, we're not responsible to Washington or the state capital of Columbus. We're responsible to our Creator.
Right.
And that puts it onto a different plane. So if I'm rejected 200 times for my novel, or if I'm threatened or sued by the city, I can look beyond it. So I would say we need to keep running through this down
Hmm.
period and
Hmm.
keep our eyes on the prize, because ultimately the moral good, I believe, will win.
All right. All right, John. I really appreciate you being with us on the Lean to the Left podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. And I wish you guys the best of luck with all that you do. I think that the work that you're doing is just badly needed and just wonderful. And best of luck with your book. And I'm sure you have other ones coming, right?
I'm looking at, I debated because it's a major effort, but I've got two sequels in mind that I'm
Okay.
looking at. So I need
Well,
to live to be, I think I need to live about another 14 years to get it all done.
oh well, I mean that should be doable. You'll
Actually,
find
I
time.
hope it is. It's just that all my years in construction played havoc on my bones, but I
Well,
feel
tell
like
me about that.
I feel my mind is good for another 20 years.
Well, that's what counts.
That's what counts. That's exactly right.
Absolutely.